Vancouver's fine rain was a constant curtain, a gray veil that seemed to separate Anahit from the world. Outside the small apartment, the city pulsed with a life she could no longer feel. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the clinking of wooden beads she strung on nylon threads, creating simple bracelets to sell online. Each clink was an echo of the life she had left behind. Armenia was no longer a place on the map, but a phantom pain in her chest, a scar that throbbed with the memory of her husband, Levon, lost in the senseless conflicts that tore apart his land. She closed her eyes and saw his smile, heard the echo of her daughter Sona's laughter in the happiest days, before the world crumbled. Now, Sona, at 7 years old, was a pale ray of sunshine in the twilight of her existence. The girl nestled on the worn sofa, a thin blanket wrapped around her small shoulders, her large brown eyes watching her mother with a seriousness no child should have. "Mom, it's cold," she whispered, her voice a mere whisper. Anahit forced a smile, a painful movement of her parched lips. "I know, Xinghao Yergujian Xinghao, my soul. Let's warm up with tea." She stood up, her body aching from the long hours sitting on the floor, and went to the small stove. The electricity bills were overdue, the rent was a constant shadow looming over them, and the nearly empty refrigerator whispered promises of hunger. She counted the coins on the table, enough for bread and maybe a little cheese the next day. The act of breathing was an effort, each inhalation heavy with the weight of survival, each exhalation a secret desire to disappear, to be swallowed by the fog and oblivion. She was a refugee, a single mother, a shadow. She existed for Sona, but the flame within her was fading, dwindling to a faint, trembling ember. The rain beat against the window like insistent fingers, reminding her that there was nowhere to run, nowhere safe. She served tea to Sona, her calloused hands trembling slightly as they enveloped her daughter's small, cold fingers. "We're okay, Xinghao Yergujian Xinghao," she lied, the word okay hanging in the air like a ghost. "We're together." It was the only truth she had left, a tenuous thread that prevented her from completely falling apart in that cold, silent apartment, under the endless rain of a country that was not yet her home. The biting wind of the following morning felt like a blade, piercing the thin coat Anahit wore. She walked quickly, pulling Sona by the hand, her worn-soled boots clattering on the wet cobblestones. Their destination was the flea market, where she hoped to sell the last 3 bracelets she had made. The money was for milk, for bread, for another day of precarious existence. Sona stumbled, a sob caught in her throat, and Anahit pulled her close, feeling the small bones of the girl's shoulders through her coat. "Just a little more, darling," she whispered, more to herself than to her daughter. The train station lay on the way, a steel and glass portal that spewed people into the city. That's when she saw him. A man, huddled on the icy ground, leaning against the brick wall. He wasn't an ordinary beggar. His clothes, though dirty and soaked, had a cut that spoke of a different past. An old tagaz, a traditional Armenian hat, lay fallen beside him, drenched by the rain. His shoulders trembled not only from the cold, but from a silent agony. People passed by, averting their gaze, their faces masks of indifference. Anahit felt an instinctive pull. To keep going. To protect what little she had. To protect Sona. But the man's eyes, they were empty, a mirror of the very emptiness she carried within herself. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. Sona tugged at the hem of her coat. "Mommy, he's cold." The childlike voice, innocent and pure, cut through the deafening noise of the traffic and her own anxiety. Anahit stopped. Her hand touched the coins in her pocket, the metallic sound whispering of tomorrow's hunger. She looked at the man, then at Sona's large, worried eyes. A war raged in her chest in a matter of seconds. The instinct for survival against the echo of humanity that hadn't yet been completely extinguished. She took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs. With a determination that arose from the depths of her own pain, she turned. She walked to the man and, without saying a word, knelt down. He didn't even lift his head. She placed all the coins she had, all her day's earnings, all her bread for tomorrow, beside his wet hat. Then, with slow movements, she unwrapped the red wool scarf she had knitted herself, her only truly warm item, and carefully wrapped it around the man's neck. He finally looked at her. His deep, dark brown eyes met hers. There were no words, only a silent, brutal recognition of a shared pain. A single, solitary tear rolled down his dirty face. Anahit nodded once, her own eyes brimming with tears, and stood. She took Sona's hand and walked forward, her body trembling not only from the cold, but from the magnitude of what she had done. She had chosen humanity over hunger. And in that moment, as they walked home empty-handed and hungry, a tiny spark of warmth, small and fragile, ignited in her frozen heart. The way back to the apartment seemed twice as long. Each step was an effort, each breath a reminder of the recklessness of her act. The wind now seemed to mock her, whistling through the gaps in her thin coat, as if to say, "You see? Kindness doesn't warm. Kindness doesn't feed." Sona walked quietly beside her, but after a few blocks, her small voice broke the silence. "Mommy, you were good." Anahit looked down at the absolute faith in her daughter's eyes, and a wave of love so intense and painful washed over her that she almost fell to her knees. She squeezed Sona's hand. "Sometimes, Yurgujan, being good is the only thing left to us." But the reality was a relentless landlady waiting at the door. Mrs. Henderson, a woman with a heart as narrow as her glasses, awaited them with her arms crossed. "Mrs. Petrosian, the rent," she said, her voice sharp as the wind. Anahit swallowed hard. "Tomorrow, Mrs. Henderson. I promise. Tomorrow." The woman let out a snort of disbelief, her gaze sweeping down the empty hallway behind them before turning and leaving, the click of her heels echoing like a sentence. The apartment door closed, and the silence descended again, heavier than ever. Night fell, bringing with it a deeper chill. With no money to turn on the heater, they huddled in bed, wearing whatever clothes they had. Anahit hugged Sona, trying to transfer what little warmth her body could generate. Hunger was a physical presence, a dull, throbbing pain in her stomach. She stared at the dark ceiling, tears silently streaming down her face. Doubt consumed her. Had she been foolish? Had she prioritized the empty gesture to a stranger over the well-being of her own daughter? The image of the man, his empty eyes, flashed through her mind. There was something about him, a broken dignity that resonated deeply within her. But what now? Dawn would bring only more struggles, more bills, more hunger. She whispered in the dark an ancient Armenian prayer that her own grandmother used to sing, a plea for strength, for a miracle. Sona, in her sleep, snuggled closer, her warm breath on Anahit's neck. It was the only thing that kept her grounded. The act of kindness already seemed like a distant dream, a moment of madness dissipated by the icy, unforgiving reality. She closed her eyes not to sleep, but to try to escape, even if only for a second, the emptiness that awaited her the next day. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Morning arrived pale and unenthusiastic. Anahit had slept poorly, her body aching and her mind a whirlwind of regret and resignation. She prepared a weak tea for Sona, the last bag they had left, and watched the girl drink it with sleepy eyes. The plan for the day was vague. Perhaps she could pick up some clothes from the donation bank, or offer to clean the building's stairwell in exchange for a few coins. Anything. The sound of the knocking on the door was so unexpected, so out of rhythm with her quiet mornings, that she jumped, spilling some of the hot tea in her hand. Her heart raced, a drum of panic in her chest. Mrs. Henderson. It had to be. She had come to dump them. Anahit took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders, bracing herself for the humiliation. "Sona, go to your room, dear," she whispered. The girl obeyed, her eyes wide with fear. Anahit walked to the door, her hand trembling as she pulled the latch. When the door opened, it wasn't the stern figure of the landlady she saw. It was him. The man from the station. He was clean-shaven, wearing a dark, elegant overcoat that seemed absurd in that gloomy hallway. He was no longer a hunched, broken figure. He stood erect, his shoulders broad, his face marked, but with a quiet authority that made Anahit take a step back. His eyes, those same deep brown eyes that had held so much pain, were now clear, intense, and fixed on her. He held two things. In one hand, her red scarf, perfectly folded. In the other, a small, elegant leather bag. "Anahit Petrosian," he said, his voice deep, grave, and carrying a much softer Armenian accent than hers. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being heard. She could only stand there, speechless. How did he know her name? The hallway seemed to spin around her. Fear turned to utter confusion. He extended the hand holding the scarf. "You gave me this," he said, his voice soft but laden with an emotion she couldn't identify. "And you gave me so much more." He then extended the leather bag. "Please," he insisted, his eyes pleading, begging her to accept. Anahit, with automaton-like movements, extended her hand. Her skin touched his for a second. It was warm, firm. She picked up the bag. It was surprisingly heavy. He stared at her for a longer moment, a look that seemed to see through her very soul, before bowing his head in a gesture of profound respect. And then, without another word, he turned and disappeared down the stairs, his silent footsteps echoing in the silence he left behind. Anahit stood in the doorway, clutching the scarf and the mysterious bag, her heart pounding so hard she feared it would leap from her chest. Anahit closed the door slowly, her back against the wood, as if she needed physical support. The apartment was silent, the air still and heavy. She looked at the leather bag in her hands. It wasn't a dream. The smell of the leather, the texture under her fingers, the substantial weight, it was all real. "Mommy?" Sona's small, hesitant voice came from the bedroom. "It's all right, Yurgajan," Anahit replied, her own voice a tremor. She stepped away from the door and went to the small coffee table, placing the bag on it with an awkward bow. The red scarf seemed to glow, a splash of vibrant color in their faded world. Her hands trembled as she pulled at the metal handles to open the bag. The buckle snapped shut with a soft click. And then she saw it. It wasn't clothes. It wasn't documents. It was money. Lots of money. Bundles and bundles of Canadian dollar bills, neatly arranged in perfect piles. There was also a plain white envelope, with no address. Anahit let out a muffled sound, a cross between a sigh and a cry. Her legs gave way and she fell to her knees on the floor, her eyes fixed on the contents of the bag. She had never seen so much money in her life. Not even in her wildest dreams. She reached out, her fingers touching the rough edges of the bills. This was real. This could pay the rent. This could fill the refrigerator. This could buy a warm coat for Sona. This could mean security, maybe for a whole year. But then, a wave of icy fear washed over her. Who was this man? What had she done to deserve this? Was it a mistake? A trap? Perhaps he was a criminal. Perhaps the money was dirty. Her mind, conditioned by distrust and trauma, raced through dark scenarios. She picked up the envelope. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside, there was a single sheet of high-quality stationery. The handwriting was strong and elegant, in Armenian. She began to read, and each word was both a stab and a balm. Asterisk, to Anahit, whose heart still knows the language of compassion. You didn't just give me coins and a scarf. You gave me back myself. In my darkness, you were a candle. This is not a payment. It is a sharing. A small part of what was mine is now yours. Use it to rebuild your life, as you helped me rebuild my soul. With eternal gratitude, a compatriot. Asterisk, there was no name. There was no return address. Only these words. The tears Anahit had held back for so long finally erupted. She didn't cry tears of joy, but of cathartic liberation, of a relief so profound it hurt. She cried for Livon, for Armenia, for the hunger, for the cold, for the fear. And she cried for that stranger, for his pain, and for his impossible present. Sona ran to her, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "Mommy, don't cry," the girl whispered, frightened. Anahit hugged her daughter, burying her face in her soft hair. "These are good tears, Yurgajan," she sobbed. "Tears of hope." The weight in the bag was no longer the weight of secrecy or fear, but the weight of a future that had suddenly become possible. The initial euphoria lasted until midday. Anahit counted the money, her hands trembling with each wad. It was an obscene, transformative amount. But as the day wore on, the seed of doubt, planted by fear, began to sprout. She hid the bag at the back of the closet, under a pile of old blankets, but its presence seemed to pulse through the apartment, a warm and dangerous secret. Every noise in the hallway made her shudder. She imagined the police knocking on the door, accusing her of theft. She imagined the man returning, demanding the money back, perhaps angrily. Perhaps it was a cruel joke, and the bank would invalidate the bills. Her mind, so accustomed to disaster, struggled to accept kindness. She looked at Sona, who was happily sketching on the table, a new pack of colored pencils, the first luxury Anahit had allowed herself to buy on a quick, anxious trip to the store, spread out before her. The sight of her daughter's happiness was a balm, but also a source of terror. What if it were taken from them? What if this new beginning was just a prelude to an even greater fall? She couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? Mrs. Henderson would certainly ask questions. The small community of Armenian expatriates might spread gossip. She was alone with this secret, and the weight was almost as heavy as that of poverty. Night fell, and she couldn't sleep. She lay there, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, the man's note burning in her mind.
Xinghao, a fellow countryman.
Asterisk, the word echoed. She got up and silently went to the closet. She didn't pull the bag out, just touched it. The leather was cold. She wondered who he was. A wealthy businessman? An exiled politician? Someone like her, who had found fortune in a strange place. The pain in his eyes was real. The gratitude in the letter was real. She needed to learn to accept that. To accept that kindness could sometimes have a monumental return. That her compassion, born from her own abyss, had touched something deep in another lost soul. She took a deep breath. The fear wouldn't go away overnight, but she couldn't let it paralyze her. For Sona, she needed to be brave. She went back to bed and pulled the sleeping girl close. Tomorrow, she decided, she would take the first step. She would pay the rent. One step at a time. Faith, like a tender plant, began to sprout through the frozen soil of her heart. The following morning felt different. The sun, pale and wintry, seemed brighter. The air, still cold, no longer carried the same weight of despair. Anahit put on her best dress, still simple but clean and pressed, and with Sona dressed in new warm clothes, they left the apartment. The purse was hidden, but Anahit carried a significant amount of money in her regular bag, her heart beating to a rhythm of anxiety and anticipation. Their first destination was the real estate agency. Mrs. Henderson was behind the counter, her face a mask of predictable annoyance. "Mrs. Petrosian, I warned you," Anahit interrupted her calmly, extending a wad of bills. "The rent, Mrs. Henderson. And the next 2 months in advance." The silence in the room was absolute. The landlady looked at the money, then at Anahit, then at Sona, whose face was radiant with a shy smile. The expression of disbelief and confusion on the woman's face was almost comical. She took the money, counted it slowly, and without a word of thanks, just a brusque nod, wrote down the receipt. As they left, Anahit felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. It was just money, but it was the key that unlocked one of the biggest doors in her prison. The next step was a real supermarket, not a discount store. She pushed a cart, and Sona ran alongside her, marveling at the abundance. "Can we buy apples, Mom? And yogurt? And chocolate?" Sona's voice was full of hesitant charm. "Yes, you're Gujan," Anahit laughed, and the sound was strange and wonderful in her own ears. "We can buy all of that." She filled the cart with fruits, vegetables, fresh bread, cheese, milk, meat. She bought an electric blanket. She bought a warm, waterproof pink coat for Sona. Each item placed in the cart was a silent declaration. Asterisk, we're going to be okay. We're going to survive. Asterisk, we will live. Asterisk, back in the apartment, with the groceries unloaded and the refrigerator miraculously full, Anahit sat at the table, watching Sona devour a bright red apple. The girl's cheeks were flushed, her eyes shining. It was the first time in a very, very long time that Anahit had seen her daughter truly looking like a child, carefree and nourished. That day didn't solve everything. The pain of loss was still there. The homesickness was still there. But the taste of the apple was sweet, the warmth of Sona's new coat was real, and for the first time, the future wasn't an abyss to be feared, but a landscape to be explored. With the immediate pressure of survival relieved, Anahit's mind began to wander beyond her own four walls. The gratitude she felt was an overflowing river within her, and she felt an urgent need to direct that flow outward. The stranger's gift wasn't just to be consumed, it was to be honored. She remembered the feeling of helplessness, the coldness of the station floor, the gnawing hunger. She remembered the indifference in the eyes of the people passing by. She didn't want to be one of those people. One afternoon, she and Sona went to the same donation bank where she used to get clothes. But this time, they weren't there to receive. Anahit had bought 10 new, heavy blankets and several thermos bottles. She approached the surprised volunteer. "For whoever needs them," she said simply. The volunteer's face lit up with a smile of pure joy. "This will help so many people. Thank you." Sona, holding one of the blankets, looked at her mother with admiration. "Are we like the mysterious man, Mom?" The question was innocent, but profound. Anahit smiled, her heart warmed.
In a way, yes, 星号 Yurgu Jan 星号.
We're just passing the kindness on. In the days that followed, she used some of the money to buy better quality art supplies, vibrant beads, silver threads, small semi-precious stones. Her once simple bracelets had become small works of art, and she opened a small online shop, not out of desperate need, but out of passion and purpose. She enrolled in an evening English class, determined to master the language of her new country. Life was no longer about disappearing, it was about flourishing. She often thought of the mysterious man. Whoever he was, he had not only given her resources, he had given her the gift of agency, the ability to once again be an actor in her own life, and not a passive victim. She kept his letter in a special box, and sometimes, on the quietest nights, she would read it, and the words continued to bring her profound peace. She was living the answer to her own desperate prayer for a miracle. And the greatest miracle of all was not the money, but the restoration of her faith, in humanity, in the future and in herself. A month passed. Spring was beginning to whisper its arrival, the air losing some of its icy bite. Anahit was in the park with Sona, who was running and laughing in a playground, her pink coat a splash of color against the receding gray. Anahit breathed deeply, the fresh air filling her lungs. She was at peace. That's when she saw him. He was on the other side of the park, standing under a bare tree, watching them. The same dark overcoat, the same upright posture. This time, there was no fear. Just a calm, curious acceptance. She rose from the bench and, with determined steps, walked toward him. Sona, seeing her mother walk away, ran to her side, holding her hand. When Anahit stopped before him, he didn't seem surprised. His eyes, those eyes she would never forget, softened at the sight of her, and then landed on Sona, who was hiding shyly behind her mother's leg. "Hello," Anahit said, her voice calm and firm. "Thank you." She didn't need to say why. He understood. He inclined his head. "No, Anahit. Thank you. His gaze was intense, filled with unspoken emotion. "I was lost for a long time. Longer than you can imagine. War, it takes things from you that money can't buy back." He paused, his eyes lost in a distant memory. "That day at the station, I had given up. On everything. And then you came. You, with your own eyes filled with the same pain, you bent down. You saw me. Not as a problem or a nuisance, but as a man." His voice broke slightly. "You gave me back myself. The money, it was nothing. A tool. I just wanted you to know that your compassion, it echoes. It changes the world." Anahit felt tears welling in her eyes again, but this time they were pure clear. She reached out and touched his arm. "You saved my daughter. And you saved me. You gave us a life." They stood silently for a moment, two survivors of different storms, connected by a single act of kindness on a rainy day. He finally smiled, a rare and genuine gesture that lit up his stern face. "Take care, Anahit. Take care of your beautiful daughter." He glanced once more at Sona, who was now peering at him, and nodded to her. And then, as the first time, he turned and left, merging into the cityscape. But this time, there was no mystery, just a farewell. Anahit knew she would probably never see him again. And that was okay. 2 years later. The apartment was no longer the same. The walls were painted a warm color, photographs, old ones from Armenia and new ones from Canada, adorned the shelves. The sound was no longer the lonely clinking of beads, but Sona's laughter and the hum of Anahit's laptop, who now ran a successful online business selling handcrafted jewelry. She was no longer a refugee trying to disappear. She was a businesswoman, a respected member of the small Armenian community, a woman who taught crafts to other immigrant women. She used the gift she had received not as a crutch, but as a springboard. She had invested, learned, grown. That night, they were on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle. Sona, now 9 years old, was taller, her eyes still shining with the same intelligence, but without the weight of early worry. "Mommy," she said, her head resting on Anahit's shoulder. "Do you think the mysterious man is happy?" Anahit hugged her daughter, gazing at the horizon. "Yes, Yergujan," she whispered, her voice full of deep certainty. "I think he is. Because the happiness he gave us, it overflows. It cannot be contained." She thought of her journey. From the absolute darkness of loss and displacement, to that desperate act of kindness in the cold, to the fear and confusion of the present, and finally, to this life, a life built not on forgetting, but on memory. The memory of the pain that made her compassionate. The memory of the despair that made her courageous. The memory of the mysterious man reminded her that even in the most broken souls, there exists the capacity for transformative kindness. She hadn't disappeared. She had been reborn. And as she stood there with her daughter safe in her arms, under the starry sky of her new home, Anahit knew that their story was no longer about trying to disappear, but about being found, first by a stranger and finally by herself. The light in the apartment was no longer a flickering ember, but a beacon, warm, steady, and bright.